So, we've been talking a lot about how we use different cognitive strategies to maintain our sense of self or maintain our ego. And today, I want to branch that over into talking about how we also use our group identities to reinforce our sense of self esteem and to protect that sense of ego. So, I want to think a little bit about in groups and out groups. A couple of big ideas just to get going with. Again, we come back to schemas over and over again. But something that is true about schemas is that they are a way that we group people into different types of people almost automatically. This is very instinctive. And there's, to some extent, not a lot we can do about the fact that we do group people, though we can do some work around how we group them and what groups really matter. But the impulse to sort of put people into groups, whether that's like principal or grandmother or student or toddler or firefighter or whatever, those things all happen really automatically. Okay. Second thing, once we begin to identify groups, tend to identify ourselves with certain groups, meaning that we sort of disidentify with others. And once we have an in group, a group of people that is our group, it is very easy for us to apply preferential thinking to our in groups in the same way that we do that for ourselves. Okay. So, with those two big ideas in mind, let's take a quick look at the process of in grouping and out grouping. So the first step in creating an in-group and an out-group is what we call categorization. And categorization is where we use schema to assign people to groups based on some sort of similarities. We might call this stereotyping, and to some extent, stereotyping can be helpful, right? So if you look at somebody and they're a nurse, you have a set of schema that tell you who is this person, how should I interact with them, and that helps us in all kinds of social situations, right? Once we have categorized people, we then move on to identifying ourselves with some of these different groups. Okay? Um, Obviously, we're going to identify with some groups and not with others. And the people that we identify with, we call the in group. Those people that we don't identify with can be called our out groups. Okay, so for each individual, we're going to have multiple sets of in groups and out groups. Depending on a number of different factors of our identity, where we, grow up, the things that we like, the activities we enjoy, the personalities we have, right? All of those things are going to shape different in-groups and out-groups. And then the third sort of stage of this process is comparison. Once we, just like we do social comparison to learn about ourselves, we tend to do group comparison. And social identity theory says that we automatically compare our in groups to other out groups, and we do this in favorable ways that enhance our self image. There are some exceptions to this, but in general, we want to see ourselves in a positive light. So we also want to see the groups that we are part of in a positive light. Okay. And so just like we have a self-serving bias, we also tend to form an in-group bias. So let me give you a very silly example of this from my own experience. Okay. Let's say that I have a couple of categories of people in mind. Okay. There are runners and there are golfers. So I have some schema around what a runner is. I'm thinking back to my own high school experience, by the way. I have some schema about what a runner is like, some descriptors, right? Runners are fast, they're fit, athletic, they are tough. Okay. There are also golfers. Golfers are, I'm sorry if you're a golfer, this is just my schema. Lazy, old, maybe a little flabby. They're just not very active, right? So I've got two groups here, okay? Runners and golfers. Um, right, as a runner, identified with the runner group, which became my in group, right? Golfers then turned into my out group. So I'm identifying with one of those sets of things. Okay? This leads to all kinds of comparisons. And I know that within my track and cross country team, there was a lot of conversation going on about those lazy golfers over there, right? Golfers don't even get sweaty. They're not real athletes. What kind of weird visors are those that they wear? Golf carts, you can't even walk the course. Like I'm out here running the cross country course on your golf course, and there you are just, riding in the little golf cart. What is this? Okay. So all of these things, right, are essentially comparisons between my in group and my out group, between the runners and the golfers. And uh, I and we as runners would frame these things in ways that made us feel good about ourselves, right? And so that we could look at ourselves and say, runners are awesome. In comparison, again, I'm sorry, golfers are less awesome. I am fully aware here that you could very easily flip the script on this. You could identify as a golfer and not as a runner, and then the comparison might be, running, like what kind of skill does that require? You literally put one foot in front of the other. This is like, there's no skill involved, right? What kind of spandex tights are you wearing underneath those weird looking shorts? You can very easily, right, change the comparisons to again make the other group look good. If the golfers are your in group. Something just to kind of note is that we are going to identify, right, with multiple in groups. For me, I identify with SHP teachers, women, Minnesotans, musicians, Hamilton fans, Super Bowl skeptics, introverts. All of those, for me, could be in groups in different scenarios. Now, some of them are more important to me. Probably, being an SHP teacher is more important to me than being a Super Bowl skeptic. But nonetheless, in different scenarios, right, those might be different in groups for me. And all of those then would have kind of, some sort of out group, right? People who are Minnesotans versus people who are not Minnesotans. And so just like we defend our sense of self or our ego when we feel like those things might be under attack in some way, we also tend to use defensive strategies to maintain our self-esteem for groups that matter to us. So again, in different contexts, that might look a little bit differently. But if you come after SHP, I'm probably going to activate some sort of defensive mechanism around that. If you come after Hamilton, probably the same thing, right? And again, it's super easy for me to make those comparisons that look at my in groups really favorably in comparison to others. Okay? So something just to think about, right, is that when we're making those comparisons, it's super, super easy for us to see our in groups as sort of higher up than other groups, right, as in some way superior. And you might notice then that this process of categorization, identification, and comparison can lead pretty easily to things like prejudice and discrimination. And that's going to be the subject of some of our reading this week.